The lights of New York City sparkled like a sea of diamonds outside the boutique's tall windows. I stood there, my forehead resting lightly against the cool glass, watching the endless stream of cars and people moving along Fifth Avenue. This was supposed to be my kingdom, my triumph. But tonight, the glittering city looked more like a distant galaxy, beautiful, untouchable, and utterly indifferent to my crumbling world. The boutique was empty, save for the mannequins that silently judged me from their pedestals. Draped in the latest pieces from our fall collection, I should have felt pride. Every item in the shop was a testament to my years of hard work. But instead, all I felt was dread. Bills were piling up, creditors were breathing down my neck, and my once successful investments had turned into a series of bad bets that threatened to destroy everything. I glanced at the clock. Almost midnight. The harsh blue light of my phone cut through the darkness of the room as I checked my messages for what felt like the 100th time. Nothing from the bank, no updates from my accountant, only more reminders that I was running out of time and options. The boutique had been my life, my identity. Now, it was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My fingers traced the outline of my wedding ring absent-mindedly. John didn't know the full extent of the mess we were in. He was always so focused on his own business, so caught up in his world of numbers and investigations, that he barely noticed when mine started to fall apart. I told myself it was better this way. No need for both of us to lose sleep. But I knew the truth. He would find out eventually, and when he did, he would never look at me the same way again. The phone rang suddenly, cutting through my thoughts. The caller ID flashed a name I had hoped never to see again, Mr. Carlos. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. I knew who he was. Everyone in this city did. Carlos was the kind of man whose name was spoken in hushed tones, whose presence at a party could make the air go cold. A criminal mastermind with his hands in every shady deal in Manhattan. And now, he was calling me. I answered, my voice barely steady. "This is Megan." "Good evening, Mrs. James." Carlos's voice oozed through the line, smooth as silk, yet sharp enough to cut. "I hear business has been challenging lately." I felt a chill run down my spine. Of course, he knew. People like Carlos always knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, trying to sound casual. Carlos chuckled, a low, knowing sound. "Oh, but you do. The boutique, the debts, the creditors lining up at your door. You've made quite a mess of things, haven't you?" I gripped the phone tighter, fighting the urge to hang up. "What do you want, Carlos?" "It's not about what I want, Mrs. James. It's about what you need," he said, his tone now almost sympathetic. "I can help you. Get you out of this predicament. But it won't be for free." My heart pounded in my chest. I knew where this was going. But I had to hear him say it. "And what's the price?" "Information," he replied as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "You have access to some very interesting people, Mrs. James. Powerful people. I want to know what they know. And in return, I can make those debts disappear." I turned away from the window, pacing the empty shop. The mannequins seemed to watch me, their painted eyes blank but judgmental. This was madness. I knew that once I stepped into Carlos's world, there was no turning back. But what choice did I have? The boutique, my reputation, my life, it was all on the line. "What kind of information?" I asked, barely recognizing my voice. "Names, business dealings, anything that could be useful. You'd be surprised how valuable a few whispers can be in the right ears," he said. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine another way out, but there was none. If I didn't do this, I would lose everything. If I did, I might lose even more. But in that moment, standing alone in the boutique that once symbolized my success, I knew I had already made my choice. "I'll think about it," I whispered. Carlos's voice softened, but there was a dangerous edge beneath his words. "Don't take too long, Mrs. James. Time is not on your side." The call ended, and I was left in the dark, the city lights still sparkling outside, mocking me with their distant brilliance. I stared at my reflection in the window. A successful businesswoman, a wife, a fraud. And now, possibly, an accomplice. Tomorrow, I would have to decide just how far I was willing to go to keep my empire from crumbling. Tonight, I stood on the edge of a precipice, peering into the abyss. And for the first time, I couldn't see a way back. As I leaned against the window, my thoughts drifted back to a time when the boutique wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. It felt like a lifetime ago, back when every step I took was gilded with confidence, and every decision I made seemed destined for success. I remember the opening day of the boutique so vividly. The champagne flowed, the flash of cameras captured every angle, and the city's elite buzzed with excitement. It was more than just a store, it was a statement. My statement. I had built this place from nothing, poured my soul into every inch of it, and it was finally paying off. Business was booming, and every day felt like a new triumph. I saw myself standing at the center of it all, wrapped in designer fabrics, shaking hands with the kind of people I'd only seen on magazine covers. Fashion editors, celebrities, investors, they were all there, and they all wanted a piece of what I had created. Orders were flooding in, and the boutique was the talk of the town. We were the new it brand, and I was the woman behind it. But success is a drug, and I was addicted. The thrill of it all, the attention, the money, I wanted more. Expansion felt like the next logical step, so I started looking at ways to grow. New lines, more locations, exclusive partnerships. I was ready to turn this boutique into a fashion empire. The investors I met were full of promises, luxury brands, exclusive collections, private labels, and I believed every word. That's when I met Leonard Davis. He was charismatic and polished, and he talked about investment opportunities like they were golden tickets. "Megan, you're sitting on a gold mine," he told me over dinner at one of Manhattan's most expensive restaurants. "All you need is a little push, and you could dominate this market. Think bigger. Think international." His words were like music to my ears. He painted a picture of a future so dazzling that I didn't even pause to consider the risks. I poured money into his projects, diversifying into everything from luxury skincare lines to high-end real estate deals. I invested in a new marketing agency that promised to take my brand global, in a pop-up chain that would put us in every major city by the end of the year, and even in a tech startup that was supposed to revolutionize online shopping. It was all happening so fast, and every move felt like a step closer to greatness. But it wasn't long before the cracks began to show. One by one, the investments started to crumble. The skincare line was plagued with legal issues, the real estate deals stalled in endless red tape, and the tech startup turned out to be nothing more than smoke and mirrors. I watched helplessly as my savings bled away, each failure pulling me deeper into a financial abyss. At first, I tried to cover it up. I cut corners, delayed payments, and borrowed more, thinking I could somehow buy myself enough time to turn things around. But the debts kept piling up, and the calls from creditors became impossible to ignore. They wanted their money back, and they didn't care about my excuses or the promises that had once sounded so sweet. The boutique began to suffer. I had to lay off staff, cut back on inventory, and cancel orders that had been months in the making. The once bustling store was now quiet, and the silence was deafening. The mannequins wore last season's clothes, and the shelves were bare. Clients who used to come in weekly now passed by without so much as a glance. And the worst part? The investors vanished. Leonard stopped taking my calls, and the partners who had once sung my praises now pretended not to know me. I was left holding the bag, my dream unraveling faster than I could stitch it back together. Every day, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, knowing that I was one step closer to losing everything. The bills kept coming, and with each one, my heart sank a little more. The fear was suffocating, an ever-present weight on my chest that I couldn't escape. I had gambled it all, and I was losing. Now, as I stood in the darkened boutique, I couldn't help but wonder where it had all gone wrong. Was it greed, pride, or just a series of bad choices that I was too stubborn to back out of? It didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was that I was out of time, out of options, and staring down the barrel of a future I couldn't afford. The boutique, once my greatest achievement, was now a monument to my failures. And if I didn't find a way to save it, it would be the last thing I ever built. I sat at my desk, staring at the phone as if it were a snake ready to strike. Carlos's offer still echoed in my mind, twisting and turning, a mix of temptation and dread. His voice had been so smooth, so certain he knew exactly what buttons to push. He had dangled a lifeline in front of me, a way to wipe the slate clean and save everything I'd built. But I knew it came with a price, one that went far beyond the money. I was raised to believe in hard work, integrity, and playing by the rules. Those principles had carried me far, but now they felt like an anchor pulling me down. The debts were mounting, and each day brought new threats of lawsuits, bankruptcies, and repossessions. Every night, I lay awake calculating numbers in my head, trying to find a way out, but all the exits were blocked. Information, Carlos had said. Such a simple word, but it felt loaded with danger. He wanted names, insider details, and secrets that could make or break powerful people. I knew it was wrong. I knew that once I crossed that line, there'd be no going back. But what other choice did I have? The weight of the debts was crushing me, and I was drowning in a sea of broken promises and failed investments. Carlos's offer was the only lifeboat in sight, no matter how poisoned it might be. I took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and dialed his number. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "I'm in," I said before I could change my mind. Carlos didn't sound surprised. "Smart choice, Mrs. James. You won't regret it." But as I hung up, I already did. From that moment, my life split into two worlds. In one, I was Megan James, the polished, composed owner of a high-end boutique. I smiled, I made small talk, and I pretended everything was perfectly fine. I still hosted events, met with clients, and worked hard to project the image of a woman in control. My staff had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. To them, I was still their confident boss. Albeit one a bit more stressed than usual. But in the other world, the one hidden behind closed doors, I was something else entirely. I spent late nights combing through documents, memorizing emails, and carefully gathering bits of information to pass on to Carlos. It started small, a phone number here, a business meeting there. But each piece of intel felt like a betrayal, a tiny crack in my already splintering conscience. Carlos was always precise in what he wanted. "You've got great access, Megan. Use it," he would say during our late-night calls. And I did. I used every contact, every business deal, and every innocent conversation to feed his insatiable appetite for secrets. It was like playing a dangerous game of chess, each move pushing me further into his grip. I told myself it was temporary, just until I could get back on my feet. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a temporary fix, it was a pact with the devil. The lies began to pile up, layering themselves like bricks in a wall I was building around myself. I dodged questions from my employees, avoided prying eyes from investors, and made excuses for every strange decision that didn't quite add up. It's a new strategy, I would say. Just adjusting to market changes. But even as I spoke the words, I could see the doubt in their eyes. How long until they saw through the facade? At home, it was even worse. John, my husband and business partner, had always been meticulous with our finances. He knew every penny that came in and every cent that went out. But lately, his questions were coming faster, more pointed. "Megan, these numbers don't look right," he'd say, poring over spreadsheets late into the night. "We're missing funds. Where's all this money going?" I tried to brush him off, to explain away the discrepancies with vague references to unexpected expenses and market shifts. But John wasn't stupid, and his instincts were sharp. He was trained to spot inconsistencies, and now he was seeing them everywhere. I watched him from across the dining room table. His brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers tapping nervously against the screen of his tablet. Every time he looked up, I felt like he was staring right through me, inching closer to the truth. One night, as we sat together in silence, he sighed deeply and set his tablet down. "Megan, we need to get a handle on this. Something's not right. I feel like I'm missing something." My stomach twisted with guilt, but I forced a smile. "It's just a rough patch, John. We've been through worse." I reached out, squeezing his hand, trying to convince him, and myself, that I could still fix this. That I could keep him in the dark just a little while longer. But the cracks were widening, and I was running out of lies. Every day, the pressure mounted, and every night, I prayed that John wouldn't dig too deep. I had gone from being his partner to his problem, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the walls I'd built around us came crashing down. As I watched him retreat into his world of numbers and investigations, I realized that the double life I was leading was unsustainable. Carlos had me on a leash, and John was hot on my trail. I was trapped between two men, both of whom had the power to ruin me, and there was no escape. John's expression was tight, his eyes focused on the laptop screen in front of him. It was late, and our apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the relentless tapping of his fingers on the keyboard. He had been working late every night for weeks now, buried in financial reports, and I could feel the tension radiating off him like a storm about to break. I watched him from the kitchen, pretending to be busy with a glass of wine, but my attention was glued to his every movement. I could see the spreadsheets reflected in his glasses, endless columns of numbers that didn't add up the way they were supposed to. I knew exactly what he was looking for: missing funds, unapproved transactions, a trail of errors that had no reasonable explanation. "John, it's late," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Why don't you take a break? We can watch that new show you've been talking about." I hoped the suggestion would pull him away from his obsession, if only for a moment. But John barely looked up. "I just need to figure this out, Megan. Something's not right here." He was right, of course. Something wasn't right, because I was the one making sure of it. Each piece of information I passed to Carlos required creative accounting to cover my tracks. And every adjustment was a gamble that John wouldn't notice. But he was too good at what he did, and my web of lies was starting to tangle. John ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "We're missing a significant amount of money, and it's not just one time. It's recurring, like someone siphoning funds little by little." He glanced at me, his eyes sharp with suspicion. "I don't understand how this could be happening right under our noses." I felt my pulse quicken, but I forced a calm smile. "I'm sure it's just some accounting mistake. You know how messy things have been lately. I'll talk to the bookkeeper first thing in the morning." He shook his head, clearly unconvinced. "I've already checked with them. The discrepancies aren't just mistakes, they're deliberate. And if it keeps up, we could be in serious trouble." I took a sip of wine, trying to steady myself. "Maybe you're overthinking it. Let's just go over it together tomorrow, okay? Two pairs of eyes might spot something you missed. But John's expression didn't soften. "I don't think I'm overthinking anything, Megan. Someone is bleeding us dry, and I intend to find out who." Over the next few days, John threw himself into the investigation with a determination that made my stomach churn. He spent hours going through past transactions, cross-referencing emails, and interrogating our staff with a persistence that bordered on obsession. I watched helplessly as he slowly but surely pieced together the puzzle, each discovery bringing him closer to the truth. At home, the distance between us grew. Our conversations, once filled with easy banter and shared plans, had turned into tense exchanges filled with half-truths and evasions. I found myself avoiding his gaze, afraid that he'd see the guilt written all over my face. I knew he was getting closer, and it was only a matter of time before he stumbled upon something that would lead him directly to me. One evening, as I sat on the sofa pretending to read, John came into the room, his face etched with the weariness of a man who was unraveling a mystery he didn't want to solve. "Megan, there's something I need to ask you." I looked up, my heart skipping a beat. "Sure, what is it?" He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "Have you noticed anything strange lately? Anything that might explain what's going on with the accounts?" I felt the walls closing in, but I kept my expression neutral. "Strange? Not really. I mean, it's been stressful, but nothing out of the ordinary." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know. It's like the more I dig, the more questions I have. I found transactions linked to clients we've never dealt with, and payments are going to accounts I don't recognize." I forced myself to stay calm. "Maybe it's just an error with the system. You know how these things can happen." John shook his head. "These aren't system errors, Megan. They're too calculated, too precise. Someone is manipulating the books, and I'm going to find out who." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew I had to act fast before he connected the dots and discovered my involvement. I needed to buy myself more time, to distract him from the truth that was lurking just beneath the surface. The next day, I made a point to be at the boutique when John arrived, coffee and pastries in hand. "I thought you could use a little pick-me-up," I said, handing him his favorite, black with a shot of espresso. He took the coffee with a grateful smile, but his eyes were still clouded with worry. "Thanks. I've been running on fumes." I leaned in, my tone light and playful. "Why don't we take a break this weekend? Go upstate and get some fresh air. You've been working so hard, you deserve it." John looked at me, surprised by the sudden change of tone. "You're right. I've been letting this consume me. A weekend away might be exactly what we need." I nodded, relief flooding through me. "Perfect. We'll clear our heads, and when we get back, we'll figure all this out together." But as I watched him relax, I knew the reprieve was only temporary. My double life was growing more dangerous by the day, and John's suspicions were a ticking time bomb I couldn't defuse forever. Each step I took felt like dancing on a razor's edge, and I could only hope that when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't cut us both to pieces. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the boutique's polished floors. I stood behind the counter, absently arranging jewelry displays, but my mind was far from the delicate necklaces and sparkling rings. I was lost in a labyrinth of my own making, caught between the lies I'd told and the truth that was slowly tightening around me like a noose. John's investigation had become relentless. Every day, he discovered new discrepancies, and with each revelation, I felt his trust slipping further away. He was getting closer, too close, and I knew that if I didn't do something drastic, he'd soon uncover the full extent of my betrayal. Carlos had warned me that this would happen, that playing both sides would inevitably lead to dangerous conflicts. "You can't have it both ways, Megan," he'd said, his voice dripping with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing he held all the cards. And he was right. I couldn't keep up the charade forever. But I also couldn't afford to stop. Not now, not when I was so deep in debt that the only thing holding my life together was the fragile web of lies I'd spun. That morning, as I pretended to work, I made a decision. I would have to mislead John, throw him off the scent by creating a false trail that pointed somewhere, anywhere, other than at me. It was a desperate move, one that twisted my stomach in knots, but I was running out of options. I spent the next few days subtly planting fake evidence, a few misleading emails here, some altered documents there. I even forged a set of receipts that linked the missing funds to a former employee who had left under suspicious circumstances a year ago. It was risky, but if it worked, it would give John something else to chase, something to occupy his brilliant mind while I figured out my next move. Meanwhile, Carlos's demands were escalating. Our late-night phone calls had taken on a darker tone, his requests growing bolder and more dangerous. He wanted me to gather intel on a major business partner, Robert Sinclair, a powerful investor who had once been one of our most reliable backers. I knew Sinclair's accounts inside and out. We had worked together for years, and he trusted me implicitly. But Carlos didn't care about loyalty or ethics. To him, Sinclair was just another pawn in a game of leverage and control. "Megan, this is important," Carlos insisted during one of our calls. His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was an underlying menace that chilled me. "Sinclair's been making moves, and I need to know what he's planning. You're in the perfect position to find out." I hesitated, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. He's not just a client. He's a friend. This could ruin him." Carlos chuckled, a low, sinister sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "And letting your boutique sink would ruin you. It's all relative, Megan. You need to start thinking about survival, your survival." His words stung, cutting through the last remnants of my moral compass. Survival. That's all this was now. A fight to keep my head above water, to hold on to whatever scraps of my life I could salvage. And if that meant betraying yet another ally, then so be it. I didn't have the luxury of choosing my battles anymore, I was too far gone. The following day, I made my way to Sinclair's office under the guise of discussing a new business venture. We exchanged pleasantries, but my nerves were on edge, my smile forced and brittle. I knew what I had to do: get into his files, find the information Carlos wanted, and get out without raising suspicion. But Sinclair was sharp, and one wrong move would be disastrous. As we talked, I subtly steered the conversation toward his recent investments, feigning interest while mentally cataloging every detail. I dropped hints about needing access to some financial reports, blaming a supposed audit on our end. Sinclair was accommodating as always, unaware that I was setting him up. He gave me access, trusting me with the kind of sensitive information that only a friend or a fool would hand over. As I left his office, my stomach churned with guilt. Sinclair had always been good to me, supporting my boutique when others wouldn't. Now, I was repaying his kindness with deceit. But Carlos had me in a corner, and I was too scared to defy him. Each step I took down this path made me feel like I was sinking deeper into quicksand, struggling for air as the weight of my choices pulled me under. Back at home, John's mood was growing darker by the day. The fake evidence I'd planted had slowed him down, but not stopped him entirely. He was still digging, still haunted by the missing money and the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I watched him closely, trying to gauge how much he knew and how much was still hidden. Every time he asked a question, My heart skipped a beat, terrified that he'd finally put the pieces together. "Megan," he said one evening, his voice heavy with frustration. "I found something strange. Those transactions have been tracking. They're linked to a different account than I thought. It's like someone's been moving money around to cover their tracks." I forced a casual laugh, hoping it sounded convincing. "Well, at least you're getting somewhere. Maybe it's that former employee you mentioned? Didn't he have access before you left?" John nodded, but his expression was conflicted. "Yeah, it's possible. But it still doesn't explain everything. There's something else here, something I'm missing." I smiled, doing my best to play the supportive wife. "You'll figure it out. You always do." But as he turned back to his laptop, I knew it was only a matter of time before he uncovered the truth. My deception was a ticking time bomb, and every lie I told brought us closer to the moment when it would all blow up in my face. Carlos's grip on me was tightening, and the walls were closing in from all sides. I was trapped in a game where every move was a risk, and the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. The city buzzed with its usual restless energy, but all I could hear was the frantic beating of my own heart. I sat in my office, staring at the latest email from Carlos, his words laced with impatience and thinly veiled threats. He was growing tired of excuses, delays, and half-measures. Carlos wanted results, and he didn't care how I got them. "You're running out of time, Megan." His message read, "If you can't deliver, I'll find someone who can." The threat was clear: I was expendable. For Carlos, loyalty was a one-way street, and I knew what happened to people who failed him. I couldn't let that be me. But as much as I tried to keep up, the lies were catching up faster. John's investigation was closing in, Carlos's demands were escalating, and I was trapped between them with no way out. That's when it hit me. I needed a scapegoat, someone to take the fall and divert Carlos's wrath. And who better than the one person already sniffing around the truth? John. It was a thought so awful, so gut-wrenching, that it made me feel physically ill. John was my husband, the man I'd built my life with, and now I was plotting to frame him for my sins. But Carlos had backed me into a corner, and the only way to save myself was to sacrifice him. I told myself it was temporary, that if I could just buy some time, I'd figure out a way to make it right. But deep down, I knew that once I crossed this line, there would be no redemption. That evening, as John worked late in his study, I put my plan into action. I accessed his laptop, careful not to disturb anything that would tip him off. I knew his passwords by heart, little pieces of trivia from our years together, from our favorite vacation spots to his old baseball team. I slipped into his accounts as easily as slipping on an old coat. I spent hours crafting a trail of digital breadcrumbs that pointed to John as the source of the leaks. I forwarded confidential files to Carlos, making it look like they had come from John's email. I altered timestamps, changed IP addresses, and ensured that every move was covered. It was meticulous, exhausting work, and by the time I finished, my hands were trembling. But the trap was set, and now all I had to do was wait for Carlos to bite. The next morning, I received a call from Carlos. His tone was curt, but there was an edge of satisfaction that hadn't been there before. "Nice work, Megan," he said. "Looks like your husband's been playing both sides. You know what that means, don't you?" My breath caught in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What do you mean?" Carlos chuckled, the sound cold and merciless. "He's a liability, Megan. If John's involved, he's a problem. And I don't like problems." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. This was the reaction I'd been counting on, but hearing it out loud made it feel all too real. I had succeeded in convincing Carlos that John was the traitor. But now that meant my husband was in the line of fire. "You don't have to do anything drastic," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can handle John. Just let me talk to him." Carlos paused as if considering. "You've got until the end of the week, Megan. Either you fix this, or I will." The line went dead, and I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd done. I had bought myself some time, but at what cost? John was now in Carlos's crosshairs, and I had no idea how to protect him without unraveling everything. John seemed more distant than ever that evening, lost in his work and his thoughts. He barely looked up when I set his dinner on the table, muttering a distracted thanks before returning to his laptop. I watched him from across the room, my heart aching with guilt. He had no idea that the storm brewing around him was my doing, that every suspicious look and every late-night search was driving him closer to danger. I knew I had to act quickly. I needed to keep John away from Carlos, to shield him from the consequences of my actions. But every time I tried to steer him away from his investigation, he only dug deeper. Megan, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. I've been going over these reports again, and something still doesn't add up. I'm missing something, but I can't figure out what. My pulse quickened, but I forced a smile. You're overthinking it, John. Maybe you just need a break. He shook his head, frustration etched into his features. I don't think I am. I've been following a trail, and it's leading me somewhere. I just need to push a little harder. I fought back the panic rising in my chest. Maybe you should let it go for tonight. We can look at it together tomorrow. But John was already back at his screen, his fingers flying over the keyboard. He was too close, and I was running out of time to throw him off the scent. If he discovered the planted evidence, everything would fall apart: Carlos's trust, my fragile cover, and our entire marriage. I sat there, watching the man I loved become a target of my own making. And all I could think was that this was a game I could no longer control. I had tried to outsmart everyone, to play both sides and survive, but now I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. One wrong move and it would all come crashing down, dragging John and me with it. The guilt was suffocating, but I had no choice. I had set this trap, and now all I could do was hope that when it finally sprung, I wouldn't be the one caught in it. I was staring at the city lights, my mind lost in the chaos of my crumbling life when I received the message that changed everything. Carlos's words were brief, but the threat they carried was unmistakable. You've become a liability, Megan. We're done here. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My hands shook as I read the message again, my heart pounding in my chest. I had known this day might come. Carlos wasn't the kind of man to leave loose ends, but I had convinced myself that I still had time. That I could somehow play my cards right and walk away from this mess unscathed. But now it was clear, Carlos was finished with me. And he wasn't going to let me walk away alive. Panic surged through me. I had spent so long scheming, lying, and covering my tracks that I'd lost sight of the danger I was in. I'd become so wrapped up in my deceptions that I hadn't seen the trap closing in around me. But it was too late for regrets now. If I didn't act fast, Carlos would make sure I disappeared, just like the money I had helped him siphon away. I quickly packed a small bag, stuffing it with cash, my passport, and whatever documents I could grab. I didn't have a plan, only the desperate need to escape before Carlos's men caught up with me. I glanced around my office one last time, my eyes lingering on the framed photos of happier times, before the debts, before the lies. Before I had thrown everything away. With my heart racing, I slipped out of the boutique and into the night, ducking through side streets and back alleys as if every shadow held Carlos's hitmen. My mind was in overdrive, calculating the safest route out of the city. When it dawned on me that I couldn't leave without one crucial piece of evidence, the flash drive hidden in John's study, containing proof of my dealings with Carlos. Without it, there was no hope of clearing my name if I ever made it alive. I entered our house quietly, every creak of the floorboards echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. I knew John was still awake, his light was on, spilling out from under his study door. My stomach twisted with guilt and fear as I crept past, praying he wouldn't hear me. I made my way to the safe hidden behind the bookshelf in our bedroom, where I had stashed the drive. My fingers fumbled with the combination, the clicks of the lock loud in the stillness of the house. I retrieved the drive, holding it like a lifeline. This small, innocuous object was my only leverage, my only hope of escaping Carlos's deadly grip. But just as I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, clutching the drive tighter, my mind racing with excuses. Explanations. Anything that might placate John long enough for me to get away. But as I turned, I was met not with suspicion, but with a look of pure betrayal. John stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of shock, confusion, and anger. He was holding one of the altered documents I had planted in his files, the evidence of my lies now laid bare before him. "Megan," he said, his voice trembling. "What the hell is this?" I swallowed hard, my carefully constructed facade crumbling in an instant. "John, I can explain." "Explain what?" he snapped, stepping closer. "That you've been lying to me? Stealing from our company? Working with—" He stopped short, piecing together the full extent of my betrayal. "Carlos, this was all you, wasn't it?" The look in his eyes was more painful than any punishment Carlos could have devised. I wanted to tell him the truth, to explain how I'd been dragged into this mess, but there was no time. I could hear the faint hum of a car engine idling outside, and see the shadows of figures moving just beyond the windows. Carlos's men were already here. "John, you have to listen to me," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "Carlos is going to kill me." I didn't want any of this, but I had no choice. John's face hardened, disbelief mingling with the fury that simmered just beneath the surface. "You always had a choice, Megan. You just chose wrong." He stepped back, blocking the doorway, and for a moment, I thought he was going to stop me from leaving. I could see the battle raging within him, torn between the anger of being deceived and the instinct to protect the woman he had once loved. But there was no time left for apologies, no room for reconciliation. I had dragged him into my nightmare, and now we were both drowning. "Move," I begged, tears stinging my eyes. "Please, John, they're here." But he didn't budge, his jaw set in determination. "You don't get to just run away, Megan. Not this time." I looked past him to the window, where the dark silhouettes of Carlos's men were now visible, their presence a silent reminder of how far I had fallen. The game was over. I had lost everything, my business, my husband's trust, and now, possibly my life. Desperation took over. I lunged for the door, shoving past John with a strength I didn't know I had. He staggered back, stunned, and for a split second, our eyes met, his filled with pain, mine with a silent apology. Then I was gone, running into the night with nothing but the clothes on my back and the damning flash drive in my hand. I sprinted through the city streets, my breath ragged, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. Carlos's men were behind me, closing in with every step. I ducked into an alley, pressing myself against the cold brick wall, clutching the drive like a talisman. My life had been reduced to this one moment, caught between the fury of the man I had betrayed and the deadly reach of the criminal I had tried to outsmart. As the footsteps drew nearer, I knew I couldn't run forever. But I also knew that I wouldn't go down without a fight. Carlos had underestimated me, and John had given me one last chance, even if he didn't realize it. I wasn't going to let either of them decide my fate. I would find a way out. I had to. Because now, more than ever, my survival depended on it. I had barely slept, each minute of the night slipping away as I waited for the inevitable. I knew Carlos's men were out there, hunting me down, and that the authorities would soon be closing in too. I had burned every bridge and lied to every person who had ever mattered to me, and now I was paying the price. But the worst part wasn't the fear or the uncertainty. It was knowing that John, the one person I had always believed would stand by me no matter what, had turned his back on me. I couldn't blame him, not really. I had lied to him and betrayed him in the most unforgivable ways. I had pulled him into my mess, used him to cover my tracks, and then tried to frame him when things got too dangerous. But a part of me had always held on to the hope that he would forgive me, that he would understand why I did what I did. That maybe, in some twisted way, we could find a way out together. But that hope died when I saw the look on his face last night. The hurt, the anger, the overwhelming sense of betrayal. I had never seen him like that, and it shattered something inside me. I knew then that there was no going back. I had pushed him too far, and now the only thing left was the fallout. I spent the morning pacing the small, dingy apartment I'd managed to hide in, my mind running over a million different scenarios. Should I run? Turn me in? Beg for John's forgiveness one last time? Every option felt impossible. Carlos wanted me dead, the authorities would lock me up, and John had already made his choice. When I finally couldn't take the waiting any longer, I grabbed my phone and dialed John's number, my hands trembling. It rang once, twice, and then went straight to voicemail. I tried again, desperate for some kind of answer, but it was the same. I was alone, cut off from the only person who could save me. As I sank into the worn-out couch, I felt my world closing in. This was my punishment, I realized. Not just for the crimes I had committed, but for all the lies and manipulations I had spun along the way. I had betrayed John's trust and sold out my morals, and now there was no one left to help me pick up the pieces. Just as I was about to call again, my phone buzzed. A message from John. For a split second, hope flared in my chest. Maybe he was reaching out, maybe he still cared. But when I opened it, all that hope evaporated. It was just one line: "I've turned over everything. It's over, Megan." My heart sank. John had done it. He had taken everything, every piece of evidence, every secret, and handed it over to the authorities. He had chosen justice over me, and now, there was no escape. I stared at the message, the finality of it crashing down on me. John wasn't coming to save me. He was ending this in the only way he knew how. I sat in silence for a long time, the reality sinking in. I was trapped. Carlos's men would find me eventually, or the authorities would. Either way, my fate was sealed, and John had made sure of it. I tried to imagine what he felt, anger, relief, maybe even regret, but I couldn't picture it. All I could see was the look in his eyes when he caught me last night, the mix of love and pain that told me everything was broken beyond repair. For so long, I had convinced myself that I was doing this for us, that every lie, every betrayal was just a means to an end. But now, sitting in the wreckage of my own making, I couldn't even remember what that end was supposed to be. Was it money? Power? A way to save the business I had worked so hard to build? Or was it just my desperate attempt to stay in control when everything was slipping away? I looked around the tiny apartment, the cracked walls and flickering lights a stark contrast to the life I had once known. The boutique, the elegant parties, the life John and I had built. It was all gone now, swallowed up by my greed and my fear. I had destroyed everything, and the only person who had ever truly loved me had chosen to walk away. In the end, John had done what I couldn't. He had put justice first, even when it meant losing everything. And as much as it hurt, I couldn't blame him. I had made my choices, and now I had to live, or die, with the consequences. I packed my bag once more, knowing that this time, there was no running. I would turn myself in, face whatever punishment was coming, and maybe, just maybe, find some way to make peace with what I had done. Because if John could choose the truth over everything else, then maybe it was time I did the same. I left the apartment, stepping into the sunlight with nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of my own mistakes. The city buzzed around me, indifferent to my fate, and for the first time, I understood what John had meant when he said I always had a choice. I just hadn't made the right one, until now. I sat in the dimly lit cell, the cold metal walls pressing in on me, and tried to find some semblance of peace amid the chaos. The reality of my situation had finally sunk in. My boutique, the empire I had built with such ambition and pride, was now just a memory, its doors closed, its legacy tarnished. I had been arrested and charged with embezzlement and conspiracy, and the weight of my actions felt heavier than any physical chains. The days in prison blurred together, marked only by the relentless ticking of the clock on the wall. Each tick was a reminder of the time I had lost and the choices that had led me here. The small window in my cell offered a sliver of the outside world, but the view was of nothing but gray concrete and barbed wire. It was a far cry from the vibrant city lights and the life I had once known. I had spent countless hours reflecting on my decisions, replaying every moment that had brought me to this point. I had made so many wrong choices, driven by fear and greed, and in the end, it had cost me everything. The life I had envisioned, the future I had planned, it was all gone. And as I looked back, I realized how much I had taken for granted. John had moved on. I knew that much from the letters and messages that had filtered through to me. He had managed to distance himself from the wreckage I had left behind and was starting anew. There were glimpses of his efforts to rebuild his life, to find some semblance of normalcy in the wake of the storm I had caused. He had made the right choice, the only choice that could have brought justice to our situation. And though it hurt to admit it, I understood why he had done it. John had always been principled, unwavering in his sense of right and wrong. He had chosen justice over me, and despite the pain it caused him, he had remained true to his values. In some strange way, I admired him for that. I had let my desires and fears overshadow my integrity, and now I was paying the price. The letters he sent were terse but polite. He spoke of moving forward, of finding new opportunities, and of making peace with the past. There was no bitterness in his words, only a resigned acceptance of the reality that we could never return to what we once had. I could sense his resolve to never again let love cloud his judgment, to never again let his heart lead him astray from his principles. As I sat in the small, uncomfortable chair in my cell, I made a silent vow to myself. I promised that, once I had served my time and faced the consequences of my actions, I would strive to rebuild my life, albeit from a very different starting point. I would confront my past mistakes and work to make amends, not just for my own sake, but for the sake of everyone I had wronged. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but I had to try. I had to find some way to atone for the damage I had done and to reclaim a sense of integrity that I had lost. It was the least I could do. In the end, the lessons I learned came too late to save my marriage or my career, but they had not been in vain. I had discovered the true cost of betrayal, the price of letting ambition overshadow my values. And while I might never be able to undo the harm I had caused, I could at least try to make something positive come out of it. As I looked out through the small window of my cell, I saw the first hints of dawn breaking through the gray clouds. It was a new day. And though it held no promises of redemption or forgiveness, it was a chance to start anew. For John, for me, for everyone who had been touched by the storm I had set in motion. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, letting the cool air wash over me. I had made my choices, and now I had to live with the consequences. But as long as I had the strength to face each new day, I would keep trying to find a way to make things right. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step towards finding some semblance of peace in a world that had been forever changed by my actions.